Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, with video production and studio provided by MaxLux Media, sponsored by Dorada Nutrition, with your host being myself, Steve Wire, a freelance reporter. This podcast is dedicated to fostering quality dialogue surrounding all things local policy related in North County, San Diego. Join us weekly as we interview political leaders, analysts, professionals, and community members on issues ranging from homelessness to housing density to elections. All right, well, today we bring in the studio two guests to discuss the recent fallout around the events of Nathan Fletcher's resignation from the Board of Supervisors. So to my right, we have Steve Puterski, who is a reporter for the Coast News. Steve covers Carlsbad and Vista. He is a graduate of Colorado State University and has been a journalist for nearly 20 years. And then on my left, we have Zack, Gianino, who's a former political candidate, a UCSD alum. He's one of the VPs of the San Diego Young Republicans and the founder of the organization Fed Up with Fletcher, which seeks to hold Nathan Fletcher accountable for his policies. So I wanted to bring two guests in today to sort of provide a roundtable discussion about this topic. But before we get into some questions here, I think it's important to our viewers to give some sort of background and backdrop to what's been going on. So for those of you who aren't aware about Nathan Fletcher, he has been the San Diego Board of Supervisors' 4th District representative, elected in 2019. He was a former Marine. He was a state assembly representative for the 75th District, and he's also a former mayoral candidate. So he was elected, as I said, in 2019, and then in February 6th, 2023, actually announced his candidacy for state senate, seeking to replace Tony Atkins. But then on March 26th, Fletcher announced that he would seek treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder and alcoholism. And then on March 29th, news broke of a lawsuit from an employee of the San Diego Metropolitan Transit System, of which Nathan Fletcher was the chair, who alleged that Fletcher had sexually assaulted her and that she had been fired after resisting his advances. So Fletcher subsequently announced his resignation from the Board of Supervisors, effective at the end of his medical leave, which he's still currently on. On March 30th, a second woman claiming to be a former intern of Fletcher, who has served as an adjunct professor at UCSD, came forward with new accusations of alleged inappropriate behavior by Fletcher. And then Fletcher's wife, Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, got sucked into the mix as well. She was accused of threatening the first accuser to make her, quote, look terrible. She filed a complaint against Fletcher. Gonzalez Fletcher is not named as a defendant, but said last week that she would join her husband in suing Figueroa for extortion if she proceeded with the complaint, according to the lawsuit. So she and her husband are sort of under fire for that as well, for threatening to essentially make this person's life look terrible, etc. Now, I wanted to bring both of you in because I think, Steve, you've been following this and you've been covering this yourself for a while. And then Zack, you obviously been following Nathan Fletcher himself for quite some time. And I know you're a huge fan.
Love him.
Love the guy. But first of all, what I wanted to talk about is just sort of the fallout from this in terms of the Fletcher political machine itself. Nathan Fletcher has been just sort of this leading Democratic figure for some time in the county. And just, I guess, Zack, I'll start with you. How does this affect the Fletcher political legacy? And what does this mean for that sort of conglomeration going forward?
Yeah, so Fletcher, if the audience doesn't know, has been the really poster boy of the Democratic Party here in San Diego for quite some time. He has really corralled a level of support in the highest level of institutions here in San Diego. So he's had kind of a smooth sailing when it comes to how orgs are backing him. And so because of his tentacles being so entrenched in San Diego politics, with his downfall right now, it sent the entire Democrat Party side of things is really in shambles because they invested in a tremendous amount of money. The Jacobs family has invested a tremendous amount of money. And so there's a lot being lost when it comes to what Fletcher can do for Democrats. And so as you saw, a lot of pieces started to kind of fall into place where, Colin Parent stepped up to take Alicia Weber's position, who stepped up to take Fletcher's prized campaign direction, for the Senate position. So that created a real kind of musical chairs, if you will, of people already kind of on the inside. And that has huge impacts on, what the Board of Supervisors looks like, what the representation of the Senate's gonna look like, state Senate, and then even the Assembly. So his And we're not over. This isn't over yet. There's so much that is continuing to be uncovered from what Fletcher has been involved in, and it's going to show, and it's showing a lot of the people who are political active or leaders here in the community are connected to him. And so you could see the reluctance in people providing statements for his resignation. You would think something very clear and inappropriate would have immediate condemnation and distancing themselves. And they distanced themselves, but for the most part, the responses were very, very scripted. They were very late, and it's an uncomfortable position for the entire side of the aisle, for sure.
Sure. Steve, I'll turn to you. To put it bluntly, I mean, is this situation, these accusations, this sort of the end of an era for the Fletcher political machine?
At least in the short term. Obviously, his career has been vaporized for now, but we've seen throughout the country, scandals that have happened, and then, 5, 6, 7 years go by, and they've been rehabilitated, and they're good now. So there is still that, and a lot of my sources that I've talked to still fear or think that is a possibility. But in addition, him and Lorena, from what I've been told and reported on, and they've always had their eyes on the governor's mansion. And now there's a huge roadblock to that. So can they get there? I don't know. But the way back for him could be a little bit easier because she holds such a powerful position with the California Federation of Labor. Millions of dollars in campaign donations. Candidates have to get her okay. And if they don't, you're kind of ostracized, and you have to run these guerrilla grassroots type of campaigns to win. And it's really hard to do that without the endorsement of the party because it opens up so much money. So we'll see how it plays out in the next few years with Fletcher, and if people have just kind of been tired and move on. That sort of happened with Dave Roberts in 2016. He was on the Board of Supervisors. There was some impropriety there, a sexual scandal. I don't know how much that really played in the election because the demographics of District 3, who's now represented by Tara Lawson-Rimmer, although she didn't run in that race, that was Kristen Gaspar who beat Roberts. It was a different political map before redistricting had. So it was a little bit more right-leaning versus now where it's left-leaning. So we'll see. But yeah, short term, definitely Fletcher is gone. And the party, like Zack said, is scrambling. The pieces are moving at a furious rate. And yeah, we'll see if anybody else is gonna kind of step up. And there are a couple people who've already announced for an application or to run in a special election for the Board of Supervisors. That would be Janessa Goldbeck, who lost to Sarah Jacobs in 2020. For the congressional seat, and then Monica Montgomery Stepp, who's a current city councilwoman down in San Diego.
Sure. And before I get into the discussion about the replacements, I did want to make a note, which is, to your point, Steve, the allegations against Fletcher, we've seen it play out before at the local level where allegations sink a political person's career. We've also seen, though, especially even at the national level, I'd argue, a lot of examples of accusations, but then that person's career continuing or even expanding. I mean, and I don't want to get into discussion about presidential politics, but I mean, look at Bill Clinton, look at Donald Trump. I mean, allegations of sexual impropriety didn't sink these men. I mean, Bill Clinton won re-election after the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Donald Trump, was accused of multiple sexual assaults, but still ended up winning the presidency. So, I mean, I'm just using these as poster board examples of political careers can resurrect after allegations of impropriety. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'll leave it up to people to decide. But I do want to get into this discussion of the replacement now. I want to turn, either of you can answer this question. Basically, who are the leading candidates right now to replace Fletcher, and what's their story essentially? Steve, Zack, I don't know who wants to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just piggyback off what I said real quick, and then I'll throw it over to Zack. You have Goldbeck, you have Montgomery Stepp, and then, it's been reported that Amy Reichert, who lost by 30 points to Fletcher just in November, may throw her hat in the ring as well on the Republican side. And that's as much as I've heard from my people and the current reporting out there. I'm sure some others will come to the surface. And the Republicans, I think they do have an opportunity, and maybe if they distance themselves from a Reichert type, and somebody maybe a more moderate type, they're always going to be labeled as like a Trumper or something like that. So there's always that hurdle that they have to overcome. And the district is overwhelmingly blue. It's like 194,000 registered Democrats in that district. So that's a big disparity in the voter block. But with the scandal and the history of the party and a lot of Democrats, I mean, there is a long line. Will Rodriguez Kennedy, he was the chair of the Democratic Party just last summer, had allegations in a lawsuit alleging rape. And then Stephen Whitburn, a councilman in San Diego, is a witness / defendant in that case. So there is a lot of dirt there, and our voters, going to be tired of that kind of link between the party and these people. So, it's going to be interesting for sure. And so, we'll just have to see. I think, and for the Board of Supervisors, I think there is some agreement that an appointment could be good because you can save money. You get somebody into office sooner rather than later, but that's going to be a battle too because ours are going to want somebody that maybe leans more their way. And obviously, the Dems want somebody who leans their way. So we'll see how the horse trading works out.
The election itself wouldn't take place till next year. Is that correct? So
I think so. Either November 2023 I've seen too, or next year at the primary would be in March.
So what happens to the seat until then?
They're gonna have to learn to work together.
Okay.
And it stays open basically.
Sure.
And so
now, Zach, I want to turn to you. Is this sort of in the terms of the discussion about Fletcher's replacement? Is this a prime opportunity for Republicans to step up and claim a seat that's been, obviously strongly Democrat?
Yeah. So one of the reasons, beyond it being catchy, I named it Fed Up with Fletcher, is because I truly believe there is a sentiment of people becoming fed up, even with their own party, even with their own kind of, control or assumption of who's going to assume positions. I think people want to see something more authentic come out of their community. And so I do actually believe this is, I wouldn't say, oh, it's in the bag for someone leaning Democrat. I wouldn't. I think we still do have time till we know the mechanism to replace him. And I think right now with people being burned in the way they were, that the opportunity and idea of somebody maybe a little different isn't going to be as bad as an idea if Fletcher didn't do what he did. So I do think this opens the door. But again, there's got to be, kind of like Steve said, there's got to be a candidate that starts envisioning both sides. Like, one side wants to talk about what Fletcher put the county through during COVID, and the other side wants to talk about where we are, where we can go. I really think a candidate right now has got to talk about both because there's going to be people that did not and do not and cannot forget what they went through the last 3 years. But then there's those that are over the last 3 years and want to move forward. Mm-hmm. And so you have to have a balance of, I know where we are or where we were, I know where we're at, I know where we can go. And until we have that, I really think it's, I think the word shambles is really, it's just kind of a real influx of, it could go either way, in my opinion.
Sure. Do you, as a Republican yourself, do you believe as though Republicans are capitalizing on this situation as they should for political gain, or what's your take on that?
It's a great question. As I've been very invested in this fight, I guess my standard would be no. No, they have not owned up to how they could have and how they should have and how they can really emphasize Fletcher's departure and the impacts of it, because for nearly 10 years, he's been public enemy number one to the party. So it's I do think there's got to be more initiative when it comes to, calling out the actors involved, calling out the network that supported and enabled it. That's the role right now. The Republicans are not in the majority. They're not really, unfortunately, they're not really factors in the governance, but they can be in the opposition. And this whole argument is on the side of Republicans if it's messaged correctly. So it's just, I think, every day we go further on, it becomes a little more, I would say, disingenuous to release something. So it's unfortunate those that didn't say something out of a fear of maybe, again, retaliation, which is the very reason why you should call this person out, because of the vindictive nature of that group. But yeah, I do think Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, what do you make of the reaction from Democrats and Republicans to this in terms of, Republicans trying to capitalize, Democrats trying to distance themselves? I mean, how do you think it's been handled?
Not very well. I would say probably on both sides. Jim Desmond actually was probably the strongest voice, and he came out once kind of things unfolded that week after March 30th when the news broke. And let's not forget too, there's a second woman that has claims as well.
Yep.
And so there'll be probably more coming from her down the road, and there might be others. But Desmond came out with a pretty strong and poignant response saying he needs to go and it needs to be now. The Dems, they just kind of were sitting in the boat and just waiting to see maybe we pull this off and he can, weather that storm and fight through. And I look at it as, so I compare it to the LA City Council in October of 2022, I think it was, just last year, when Nuri Martinez and several others and a labor leader were caught on tape saying some very racist things and very discriminatory things about the black residents up there, other council members, how to disenfranchise black voters and gerrymander and things like that. Well, three of them resigned. The labor leader, Nuri Martinez, who was the council president, and another council member. Kevin DeLeon, who served in the assembly with Lorena Gonzalez, by the way, did not and has drawn complete ire from the black community up in LA. So I see some parallels here to why the Dems didn't respond. Can we just fight through this and get through it and let it blow? He takes his public shaming and then moves on. But, and then when they finally did, there were some responses like Tara Lawson-Remmer. She just put out something that was basically, word salad and didn't even address the issue at first. And so, it was people kept following back up. They were like, can you address the issue at hand here? These are serious allegations from somebody in a massive position of power over a staffer, at least for the lawsuit with Grecia's lawsuit. And so, it needs to be taken serious. And then then the dam broke. One of the city council, I think it was Vivian Moreno, finally put out something condemning it. And then we saw an influx of people finally, follow her lead. But even before that, like we talked about Colin Parent and Akila Weber, they just announced their runs for, office and stepped over the corpse of Nathan Fletcher without even acknowledging, the allegations. So, and then they finally had to do it because they got called out for it. But so I thought overall, and then Rebecca Jones she sent a statement to me because she has been harassed as well and gone through some of that abuse, and so she had a poignant one. But other than that, I don't know why the Republicans didn't do it. Maybe they felt it was more of being opportunistic and looking at it that way, or just that everybody already knew that the Republicans think he needs to go right now.
Yeah, they maybe wanted to have the moral high ground in the situation as opposed to capitalizing politically.
Sure.
Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about too is, and I don't want to turn this into a sort of bashing of the wife, but we can't but help think about the impacts that this has to Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher and her legacy as well. Now, specifically, so she's been a representative for people not familiar for the State Assembly 80th District from 2013 to 2022. She's now, as I believe Steve said, a major leader in the AFL-CIO union faction. So she has also been sort of dragged into this, not just because Nathan is her husband, but also because in the lawsuit she's specifically accused of threatening Figueroa, who's the first the first woman who came forward, to making her look terrible and that this is going to follow you the rest of your life, etc. Again, these are accusations. We don't know for sure if any of this is true, but this is what the lawsuit alleges, is that she was very involved in this scheme to cover up the whole thing. So I'm curious, and I'll start with you, Zack, in terms of how this affects her political fortunes and how this, because I've heard sort of bits and pieces that, she intended to run for certain offices, and I'm curious, how does this impact her? Can she effectively distance herself from this, or is it too late?
She cannot effectively distance herself from this. I think it's ludicrous to think she's not a byproduct of what happened. Maybe not directly, but the way she has been involved in all of Fletcher's campaigns, the way she has helped, maybe not funnel is the right word, but the way she has allocated funds from her prior campaigns into the Democratic Party that were earmarked for Fletcher. She has been very much involved in everything he's about. So on top of her fighting actively against sexual misconduct in the workplace specifically, this doesn't look well when that happens in your own household and the first thing you do is victim blame and start attacking the person claiming these horrible allegations rather than, let's hear her out like what the script has been before. It's a completely different attitude when she's in the driver's seat. So I don't think that looks well to those who look to her as someone who's going to really be principled when it comes to standing up for these things. So I think this is damaging a lot of her reputation here in San Diego, but she has a very bad reputation in LA, and she has a very bad reputation in San Francisco and in Sacramento because of some of her older debates when it came to, believe it or not, different vaccinations in the past. Her and parents particularly have been at each other's throats for years based on whether the state should have certain authorizations over vaccines or the parent. And so she's already been kind of engaged in these very intensive discussions. This just adds another layer to how people are going to look at her. Again, she's so, Fletcher and Gonzalez Lorena have been so protected by California institutions all the way to the governor's mansion. So it's one of those we can hope people will look at this situation and realize maybe she's not the person that should be championing workers' rights because she's not really doing much to defend a worker right now. But kind of like Steve said, I mean, when you know these people, there's always something up their sleeve. It's never dead and gone. It's never the end and over. So I'm very cautious to celebrate how these people move forward from here because I know how toxic they are. I know their network and the length it goes. I just hope people truly believe in something better and believe we deserve something better. Whether you're for unions or not, somebody like this should not have public influence when they're not consistently genuine when things like this happen.
Sure. So, Steve, how do you think this impacts her political fortunes?
Brandon
Gonzalez.
I mean, it takes another hit to her already, what we say, volatile or
vulnerable.
Yeah, vulnerable, reputation. I mean, she's a very divisive figure. And with Zack was talking about, the vaccines. This is pre-COVID stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It was a lot of screaming and yelling matches in the legislature on the floor. Also, Assembly Bill 5 was another big thing.
I want to talk about that.
Anti-contractor law that just got smoked by the Ninth Circuit. So she's alienated a lot of Democrats that are independent contractors from almost every industry. And so they played a game, but she still has, she still has incredible power, right? Because she's the chair, she leads the California Federation of Labor. That's millions of dollars, and people have to come begging to her for, endorsements and money. So right there, she's still standing on 2 feet. But, the way she got that job rubbed a lot of labor people the wrong way, and pretty much anybody, because you're not allowed to lobby for a job when you're in the legislature. And then when she announced her resignation in 2022, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm now the chief executive at the California Federation of Labor," it raised a lot of red flags for people. Like, well, how can you negotiate a job when you can't do that? Because you're not just going to see they just didn't post the job on Indeed, and she filed an application and was hired. That's just not how it works. So there's a lot of backlash to her for that, but she still, she has that ability to just drive through any kind of controversy with the furious rage that she's known for and just getting her way. So, but again, it's still, this is another ding in the armor. And eventually, how many of those can she take to where then the party's finally you're a liability and we're going to cut our ties?
Sure. I wanted to talk about AB 5. So AB 5 is a controversial California law that Lorena Gonzalez helped craft while serving in the state assembly. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals this month cleared the way for challenges to the law, which would force businesses to treat independent contractors as hourly employees. Critics say that the law puts financial strain on gig workers and independent operators, and President Joe Biden has actually pushed for a national version of the bill, which Gonzalez Fletcher crafted in conjunction with Julie Su, the president's pick to lead the Department of Labor. So either of you can answer this question, but how does the fallout from the Nathan Fletcher situation impact her efforts to defend this law?
I don't think it does at all. He didn't have anything to do with it necessarily, but he was a big supporter of it because obviously it came from his wife. But she did take that big loss in March from the Ninth Circuit. I watched that hearing, and the Deputy Attorney General for the state of California was just awful. He could not defend it in any kind of way. He could not cite any cases, and it got to the point where it was a 3-justice panel. The justices were freaking out. I mean, you could visibly see that, and then the ruling, the written decision, just absolutely shredded it and named Lorena like 14 times. So all the contractors were celebrating. And then there was and you mentioned Julie Su, who's the number 2 at the Department of Labor for the federal government. She's trying to be nominated. Biden wants her to take the top job. There was just a recent hearing, a House hearing, where a bunch of independent contractors, testified about how bad this bill was, because now Congressman Kevin Kiley, he used to be in the assembly up from Northern California, Sacramento area, has been laying the wood to Julie Su and frankly the AFL-CIO for pushing this law, because it was so arbitrary on what they did on who got exemptions originally. And so it was just basically, you sign this piece of paper, or you don't, or you have a lot of money to lobby and get on the good side of the unions, you got exempted. Hairstylists, barbers, obviously like exotic dancers and stuff like that. Truckers was a big one because they want them to be unionized with the Teamsters. We're not allowed these exemptions. And then it got so bad that during one of the sessions of the legislature after the law passed, is the legislature had to go back for a cleanup bill and exempt another 100+ industries. And Lorena was on the floor, almost in tears, trying to beg people not to do this. But if they didn't, the even more economic damage would have been done that has already happened now. And I mean, people are fleeing out of the state because once COVID hit, freelancing and independent contracting went up 25% across the country. And it gave these people, all kinds of people now who used to have the traditional job, wait, I can work from home, I can do my thing, I can get my own contracts. And the guise is under employee misclassification, which I think we can all agree is a bad thing. But the way they did it and the way they're trying to say that it was happening was totally false. It was just not true. And so, Julie Su picked up the ball. She was a main enforcer for that. And the state courts allowed the law to be applied retroactively up to 4 years. So that can cost people hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're a small independent operator and you're subcontracting, or it could cost you millions of dollars if you're a big company. And the ironic thing is, this is too good to pass up, and then I'll just kick it over to Zack. And so when the state EDD, was discovered $31 billion in fraud led by Julie Su, who did they hire to help clean that up? Deloitte. Who does Deloitte employ? Independent contractors.
Well taken. Hey there, San Diego. If you're on the hunt for a way to enhance your health, I have a great recommendation for you. Dorado Nutrition is a company that's all about helping people live their best lives through top-notch, American-made supplements. Their expert team has crafted products to support a variety of health needs, from weight management to muscle building and more. And with ingredients like Vidosia agrestis and Tonkat Ali, praised by a well-known neurobiologist seen on the Joe Rogan podcast, these supplements could be just what you need to reach your health goals. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your purchase by using promo code SD2023 at checkout. So if you're looking for a way to improve your health, Dorado Nutrition might just be the solution you need. Zack, do you have any thoughts on how the efforts to defend AB 5 could be impacted by the blow to the Fletcher-Gonzalez political machine?
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve did a really good job at explaining, he didn't have direct connection to it. There's other things that are stacking up against her with AB 5 that she's got to focus on, because, this is just another way of validating the types of people they are. But the bill itself is so destructive in nature. I had firsthand experience, actually, when the bill was first initiated. I was actually working with a startup here in San Diego, and it was very much around gig economy and kind of basically like the Uber for labor. And it had this very freedom, flexible, you want to work, you can work here, very open to the individual. Well, that law completely just shattered anything that that company here in San Diego has been trying to do and has been successfully doing, but the law just completely said, oh, anybody that signs onto that app is an employee of yours. Well, that's ridiculous. Like, 'cause the app is made for kind of quick money, quick interaction. And so seeing what it's done on the ground level, and then as Steve said, you kind of go up and up and up, and it's like, okay, they're $1 million companies, but they're taking $1 million hits. So it's like, this is why Uber and Lyft and these companies fought so hard, because they saw, you're gonna squeeze and drain us out until we can't even operate here. And so if that was happening to people like Uber and Lyft, think of all the small companies that had freelancers and were hiring on the go, that now, now you're liable for different penalties, or you need permits for certain things. And it's becoming more and more clear that this is prohibiting production in the state and really in the country if it gets to that level. And so I think they're going to have a hard sell trying to get it nationally, as it's become so much of a failure here in California. But I mean, people have to stay resilient, because like Steve said, Lorena has this way of fighting through the dirt and finding a way to get what she wants, because of, again, those connections all the way to the top that she's had. So something to watch, but I do think it's, with this allegation and with how she's responded and behaved, it adds a level to her character that, if you can't really trust the character, how are you going to trust the intention of the law?
Sure. Steve, were you going to say something? Otherwise,
I'll just add just a little bit. So AB 5 was so bad that even New York said no, because they were trying to push it there in New York. Okay. And Katie Hochul, the governor, was just like, no, we're not going to touch this. Or no, it's Cuomo, excuse me, before she came in. Cuomo's is like, no. He saw what it was. New Jersey's trying to push something through too. They received a lot of pushback. But leading up to Prop 22, which Uber and Lyft did, the thing that probably would have really been the biggest hit to Lorena's career is Uber and Lyft were on the verge of just shutting down in California during the pandemic. So can you imagine if that would have happened? Because I mean, how many restaurants and grocery stores pivoted to Uber Eats, Instacart, all those gig economy companies, and the ones that she obviously hates, and because she even admitted the law was arbitrary. I mean, she literally said that. So if they would have left, and some people were telling them to do that, shut down California operations, that would have been massive. Then, she probably, she was still in the legislature at the time, but would you get this labor position? Maybe, maybe not. It would probably have halted any kind of upward momentum for both of them, for Fletcher and Gonzalez, because they'd always been tied. And it's like, well, you just killed half of California's economy. Great job. Yeah, we don't want that as governor.
Sure. Yeah. Now, one final note on AB 5, then I'll move on, because I know it's not the focus of today's topic, but I did want to just touch on, Steve, but for people who are wondering, well, this law sounds so terrible, who would ever before this, but what, who sort of benefits from AB 5? What is sort of the impetus behind it?
We're still finding out. We're still trying to figure that out. Who's behind it? Yeah. I mean, who was behind it was the AFL-CIO. I mean, it was the labor unions, in conjunction with Gonzalez. They pretty much wrote the law, and she just attached her name to it and authored. Was the author, because she believes, and she said this I think when she was pitching this in an interview with KUSI, I think in 2019, but she believes that everybody, or 2020, before the pandemic, that everyone should be in a labor union. And so that's the goal. No labor unions have been created because of this. Maybe the exotic dancers one, because it was wild. The exotic dancers were the first ones to really be aware of what this law was before, when it was coming down the pipe, and they protested at her office in San Diego, and she was furious because she doesn't like being protested. She thinks she's above everyone else in that regard, and so we don't know what it can be, or because there's nothing that's good that's happened from it. It's been, a lot of people believe this is one of the most destructive laws passed by the state of California in the last 20, 30 years, and it's hard to disagree with that. I mean, the California Analyst's Office in 2020 released a report in February basically saying, we don't know anything, and this is pretty much going to be bad. There was, and all these claims of tax, recovering tax money, lost tax revenue because people weren't employees, is just totally false. but it's built on a house of lies. It's now before, potentially Congress with the PRO Act, and getting beat up. Republicans aren't going to pass it at all in Congress, and that's a good thing for independent contracting and that type of work, because it's only getting more popular for people. We saw what the pandemic did and changed working behaviors, people going out in their own businesses. So when you start your own business, like to Zach's point, you're going to need a contract at some point to people to contract. And so before the AB 5 was even passed, companies were just, you see on their job applications, this contract work, no California. If you're from California, don't apply. And a lot of people have moved out because of it. And it's just
Contributing to that California exodus.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to turn to something that was touched on earlier, which is this discussion of the Senate race in District 39. Tony Atkins currently holds the seat, but is not running again. So we're going to get a new state senator. Now, Nathan Fletcher was somebody who had announced his candidacy for the position. I guess it won't surprise people to hear that he's subsequently dropped out of that race. He's no longer running to replace Atkins. So, Steve, you touched on it earlier, but Zack, I'm going to turn to you. Who are some of the leading candidates now to replace Tony Atkins? And essentially, how are the dynamics of this race altered because of the fallout of the Nathan Fletcher situation?
Oh, kind of like I was saying, it's a big round of musical chairs, and all the chairs are owned by Democrats. So it's not much of what chair can get in, what other chairs can get into the rotation, because the chairs have already been set. And so with Akilah Weber, moving into this role, I mean, I hate to say or feel this, but it almost feels like it's going to be business as usual, right? I mean, you've got those who are supporting these candidates that, oh no, they're different. How do you say that? How do you know they're different? Because they've been in line with much of this agenda, this policy, this direction, in every position they've been in. So, I don't think people should let up on being critical of these replacements, because I don't think they're going to be as a breath of fresh air as people may hope. Because again, the whole network is in on it together, and it's not a conspiracy; it's how it works, right? I've had the pleasure of running for office in 2018, and I know how these cliques and groups and backdoor discussions. I know how this world operates, and so when you see these candidates, they're not coming out of, they're not randomly showing up. They're in line. They're there. They've been in the wing waiting for something, whether it's a natural progression or a scandal. And so to see the way the cards fell, it's one of these things, that it's like the veil was pulled over our eyes really quick, and then now there's people coming in trying to put it back. And I really think it's important for us to wait, why should we just why should we move on completely from this style of leadership if we don't know you're not the same way? So I really think the impacts are huge, regardless, especially at the Board of Supervisors, depending on how they move forward, that can change the entire attitude of the entire county, which then has an impact on the county party, which is then going to have an impact on the elected position. So again, because it's all connected, it all is affected when something like this happens. And when it comes to, again, those replacements, you already right now have established people that are trying to fill in the position. So any grassroots thing is already at a disadvantage, because the parties are quickly trying to, move along. So, I would just say to be vigilant on what these people not just say, but what they do. Because if one thing connects them, it's their actions versus their words. And so I would be cautious of, for any Democrat listening or Democrats out there, be critical of these people, because it should be a concern how they responded when Fletcher's allegations came out.
Or how they didn't respond.
Or how they didn't, especially with Mr. Colin Parent. And I think it's probably because there's a textbook of pictures of them hugging and holding each other and being very, very buddy-buddy. And so, yeah, that's going to be, I'm sure, difficult. But if you really take the position you're in seriously, it should be no question speaking out against behavior like that. So it's kind of concerning that that's not what we got.
So, Steve, I'll turn to you. First of all, well, I want to know if you agree with Zack that it's sort of business as usual with these candidates. But first of all, can you also give us any background at all on who these people are? Because we haven't even really explained, like, Weber and Parent, like, who they are or how they fit into this whole picture.
Gotcha. Yeah, 100% agree with Zack on the line, this is how it is, like business as usual. It may have reorganized the line a little bit because maybe they were just a little more aggressive in jumping into those races before anyone else could. So that may have thrown a shock to the natural order. But there usually is that line of succession. The one I guess example that isn't like that is actually Nora Vargas, the chairwoman of the Board of Supervisors right now. When she ran, she was going up against Buen Hueso, who was at the time in the state Senate, Democrat from San Diego, and he was the preferred candidate. He was the Fletcher Gonzalez candidate. He's the one who got the county endorsement. He got much more money. She ran the grassroots campaign and was just like, hey, I'm an anti-establishment candidate. And she won. But she's become an established supervisor, an establishment-based supervisor. I mean, there's nothing that you could probably say that is compared to what her campaign is if that she's held up on her end. I mean, it'd be very difficult to find some of that stuff, I would think.
Vargas.
Yeah, about Nora. And so there is an opportunity. There are opportunities to win, but it's very difficult. Zack knows that. And then as far as who they are, Weber, she took over for her mom in the assembly a couple of years ago. Her mom was Secretary of State, I believe it is. Yes. And that was an interesting race too because Lorena had thrown her hat in the ring. Yeah. And she couldn't use identity politics because Weber is black. That's just what it is. And she was very distraught. She put out like some very interesting social media posts where you could tell she was probably in tears writing that because she could not be Secretary of State. I think that was, and that control, and Secretary of State has a lot of power. You oversee elections, and a lot of people were scared that Lorena would be in charge of overseeing elections. And as far as Colin Parent, he's with Vice Mayor of La Mesa. Like Zack said, he's very good friends with Fletcher, and that's probably one reason he struggled so hard to condemn it. And or at least quickly. He's. I don't know if anybody. We'll see how it all unfolds because the race is until next year, and see if any other Dems will jump in the race. Those two are going to be the established ones, so they're going to get the endorsements. I would think, unless two other candidates pop up that have equal credentials or under the Democratic Party guidelines, and then we'll see who the R's throw at them. But it's.
If I could make a quick point, sorry to interrupt you. I think it's worth noting the just incredible amount of amazing responses for endorsements Fletcher was receiving a week and a half up until the lawsuit broke. Each person, Sarah Jacobs, Congressman Scott Peters, the whole group.
Call them out.
Yeah, they all said all these amazing, incredible. I think Sarah even said he is a champion of women. It was just these very scripted, wild things to say about someone that I've been following for a while, and I'm like, that's not Nathan. I don't know who you're talking about. But to see those responses, and then, the there and after what happened, it's like, well, was that all BS, or do you believe that and are actually upset, or, it didn't match with what they were saying and how the lawsuit came out. So I just think that's worth pointing out how all these people had incredible, well-rounded things to say about him, but then the week next, it's like, it was either he's gone, he needs to be gone, he's, immediately, or, hope he has a good treatment. So I just think the endorsements, whether we take endorsements seriously or why we take them seriously, I think should be put into question given what was said and what happened.
Sure. I just wanted to piggyback real quick. Peters was the first one, I think, of the Dems to actually say he needs to resign immediately.
Yeah, the word immediately.
Versus Vivian Moreno, who was the first one to say he should resign. Or the May 15th day is fine. But Peters, when I saw that, I was like, okay. Because he's a congressman and he's been tied to, he's known Nathan for a long time. And that's the thing, too, is these people know each other, and they've known each other for a long time. So when you talk to sources about the personalities and behaviors of individuals like Nathan Fletcher, is this a surprise? Are they surprised by it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say no,
Really?
pretty confidently. Oh yeah, maybe not on the assault type of allegations, but infidelity, just the way they conduct themselves toward constituents, especially those who disagree. They know who they are.
Sure.
You don't know, and a lot of Nathan's team or his really close inner circle was with him when he was a Republican too. So there's been some migration over there. I mean, he didn't change to be Democrat because he found this moral authority or something. He saw the demographics of the county were changing, so he wanted to win an office. He wanted to continue his political career, so he switched to being a Democrat. I mean, Kelly Martinez did it for sheriff. Brian Manchin has done it. A lot of people have done it. So it's you just all of a sudden become part of the team because now you're ensconced. You have some sort of political juice already. So yeah, we'll welcome you with open arms.
Sure. Well, I also want to talk about the lawsuit itself. I mean, I don't know if either of you gentlemen have looked at the lawsuit, but I mean, I want to avoid speculation. None of us in the room are lawyers, but at this point, based on the reading of the lawsuit, based on maybe, Steve, your conversation with sources and research that both of you have done, do either of you have an opinion about the credibility of the allegations? Because, I mean, allegations are allegations. I mean, people receive allegations all the time. I mean, it's important to emphasize, again, nothing has been proven. Nothing has been proved concrete that Fletcher actually did, in fact, abuse these women in any way, innocent until proven guilty. But I just want to get some perspective on sort of how people think this thing could shake out. Either of you.
Oh, I think it's going to be a settlement. I don't think that it'll go to trial by any means. But it's possible it could. I've spoken with Zack Schumacher, who's Grecia Figueroa's attorney, at length several times, and just say he's not in it for the money. I'll say that, and I think he'd be okay with me saying that. So that gives me reason to believe, that she has that I would think that the allegations are at least credible. Civil court is much different from criminal court. That bar of reasonable doubt is much lower in a civil court. So a jury can find things very easily in her favor or even in Nathan's favor. But yeah, it's for me, I don't like to just jump out on opinions on what I think is going to happen, because he does have rights. And I always, even when I covered courts for years, I always try to respect the defendant's rights, because because in this country now, the reality is you're guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah.
And so, is there a chance that she could have made up these claims? We've seen that before. That has happened in cases like this. I don't think in this case it is, but again, I want to see how the process works out, unfolds, and there might be more stuff that Schumacher's holding on to before they get to court or any hearings like that. And there could be amended filings for complaints or motions and stuff like that, where new information comes out that might be more damning, or it might be helping Fletcher.
Sure. Zack, after maybe taking a look at the lawsuit yourself, doing some research, I don't know if you've talked to any lawyers about this, but do you have any opinion about the way that this could shake out based on the credibility or lack thereof of the lawsuit?
The way I look at, the power dynamic involved and the positions at play, MTS head, chair, spokesperson for the MTS, doing media and engaging constantly with the chairman. There was constant communication. I look at it like Ms. Figueroa had nothing to gain and everything to lose from putting herself into this machine. I mean, there's no way she didn't know who Fletcher was. There's no way she didn't know who and how he was connected to everything around him. So for her to put herself out there in just baseline is huge, because now, I mean, you saw, as the lawsuit alleges, Lorena Gonzalez was messaging her and threatening stuff. So and I'm sure that wasn't the only person. Actually, I know that's not the only person that was sending disparaging things. And so the pressure that this person is receiving, what's the benefit other than pursuing justice and going through the sludge of what's going to come? And I think that is how the lawsuit reads. I think, like Steve said, I do think there's more that is being withheld because of how this process is going to play out. I'm sure settlements have been offered. I'm sure they were already offered, and because there hasn't been one, it leads me to think this is moving forward, just based on speculation. But again, when you read the screenshots that are in,
I've read some of them.
Yeah. So when you look at all of them and you paint the picture and then you cross-analyze what he was saying during those days and what he was doing in the text messages, it really creates an image that maybe at first there was kind of interactions, maybe inappropriate interactions that were consensual. But it's very easy to understand how that slips, how that changes when somebody in authority starts to be a little more aggressive, starts to be a little more pushy. And I think that's where it becomes, oh crap, this is very problematic. And I think he knew that, and just the way he went about, he knew about the lawsuit February 17th, right? The pre-litigation documents and everything was sent to them February 17th. You said the timeline. These things he declared and came out like a week prior, and then admitted himself or actually 6 weeks later, I think. So they were scrambling behind the scenes to quiet this, and because it couldn't get quieted, you saw him go into this. Going in for PTSD and alcoholism. And then
Which could also be the case.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with the amount of times he posted alcohol in his hand, it's possible that was a part of it. But again, the timeline in how it all came out is as disingenuous as you can get. And it just, to me, it tells us that the scrambling was happening behind the scenes. It couldn't be stopped. Oh crap, we need to try to create a cover. Oh crap, that's not good enough because it's moving even further. And now we're at where we're at, where he's dead quiet. He's hiding from the public. He's supposedly cut off from the rest of the world. But again, you look at the timeline, and when he was supposed to be admitted versus when he released statements of his resignation, he was already in treatment. So he had access or the ability to communicate with the outside world to submit his resignation after he already was supposed to be in for like 2 or 3 days. So that to me, I think is concerning because it doesn't seem truthful. And so, yeah, I do think, and again, following Fletcher's behavior, his character, how he's been reported in the past, his history, how he got into the relationship with Lorena, which was out of infidelity, and everything that, is involved in these characters, it's not far-fetched or hard to think, based on those screenshots and the accusations, that there's some credibility here. So sure. We'll see how it plays out. But
I just wanted to jump in and piggyback a little bit off of what Zack was saying as far as the timeline goes. So La Prensa recently just published a long story of the interactions behind the scenes of what would happen, what went down. And he mentioned February 17th. That's when MTS got the letter. I'm pretty sure Fletcher, in that story, it cemented or confirmed that Fletcher knew about this well beforehand because he had approached her to make an offer. So Fletcher and Gonzalez, claim that she is trying to extort them for millions of dollars. This story tells a different story of one that he's trying to nip this in the bud ASAP before it gets out, and that so him and his lawyer make an offer. It goes down, and then to the rest of Zack was saying, and then they finally get an offer. And then the March 26th announcement of him going into rehab, well, according to the story, it sounds like that's not the case at all, the La Prensa story, and that it's just, okay, yeah, here, you got us, we'll give you some money, we'll not run for Senate, and we'll go away. And they gave him a lowball offer that was not satisfactory, apparently, and so Schumacher filed suit and lit the world on fire in San Diego, at least for a couple of weeks. But yeah, and that's another part of the story that we really haven't talked about is MTS, like the fallout from that. I mean, sure. What did they know? When did they know it? When did the board know it? Because the letter went to the chief human resources officer. So you'd imagine something like that immediately gets distributed to the rest of the executive team and the board of directors, and they're all claiming that didn't happen. So either this guy is going to be the scapegoat and get fired, or it's going to come out that a hell of a lot more people knew about it. And what is that? How does that fall out? Because I get it, in their position, they're not going to comment on anything legal, right? You never do that. But in this situation, because it's so crazy, it's like, I don't know if that argument might just go by the wayside and be like, oh, you need to resign because you knew what was going on and you were propping this guy up. And, when he announced his Senate run, it was actually the day Garcia was fired, February 6th. So, there's a lot of coincidences, if you want, if you're on a Fletcher supporter and believe. I've received some tweets and that are just kind of mind-boggling. So I just have to put them, hey, here's the facts, and put them in that box because they're trying to spin the story in his favor, and it's just not working out. So it'll be interesting to see how the legal process moves forward. But I think it'll be a settlement, but I could also see a trial.
Yeah, it seems to me like, again, taking a step back here, the point that was made earlier by you, Steve, was that regardless of how this lawsuit plays out, the reality is that in the era that we live in now, in the era of social media, in the era of these accusations being hurled at people, the reality is that whatever you think of the credibility of the accusations against Fletcher, the damage is done because we do live in a pretty much guilty until proven innocent time. And so again, even if you're somebody who really believes in these accusations and thinks that regardless that he is in fact guilty, the reality is that the damage to his legacy is done.
Yes.
The fact is that allegations like this in the era of internet and the era of social media follow someone like this forever. So that's kind of a done deal. But as far as, and this is kind of the last big topic I want to get into, I want to talk about regionally the Democratic Party, sort of Nathan Fletcher as this figurehead of the regional Democratic Party. Like, what are the ramifications and fallout for the party as a whole in the aftermath of the situation? Zack, you are an involved member of the Republican Party, so you understand the inner workings of party dynamics. You've run for office. You sort of know, again, as you talked about earlier, how these backdoor discussions work. What do you think Democrats are doing right now to essentially avert further disaster from the situation? How does this impact the party going forward?
Yeah, I think the tactic being used right now is stay quiet. Let it blow over, right? Because we've gotten into this very eerie silence these last 2 weeks. And I think that, again, is not by accident. I think that is by coordination, because the more it's talked about, the more it's interacted with, it stays at the forefront, and people are kept in this mind of thinking, wow, these are bad people. I don't really trust these people. I don't really want to vote for these people. But if you move on and you're already on to the next thing, well, then you're maybe not having those thoughts. And so the ignore and hope blows over, I think is the tactic now. Truthfully, when I think of, and even before I launched Fed Up with Fletcher, when I thought of the Democrat Party, Nathan Fletcher came to mind. He really
Absolutely.
was the poster boy of the party's futures and leverage. And so now I don't really see, Gloria is like the next person, but these people are really, they're in for hopeful rude awakenings at the voting booth, because I think people are looking at their leadership and being, I would think, disgusted. Lack of results, spending money like it's nothing and it going nowhere, us spending millions on homelessness and it going nowhere. So I think there's a shift happening, but the party, it's almost like, I was on the speech and debate team in college, and one of the tactics or strategies is, you're right, no matter what. You are right, and you best believe it and find a way to make it right. And so I think a part of that tactic is being used in this kind of moving forward is like, well, whatever we do forward is on an up and up, is on the better end of things. We're a better party. We're stronger together. You're starting to see some, especially out of some of the candidates, they're starting to say these things like, oh, we need to come together and be strong, and it's like, it's too soon and not believable given all the turmoil. But parties find a way to get to the next cycle, and I think with these latest switch ups, they probably feel confident moving forward. When they have Nora Vargas is the chair, so that's still balls in their court. Stuff at Sandag is still in the Democrat side of things, so they've got that going. Again, it's like I said earlier, business as usual. We really got to try to stop that, because business as usual has been hurting San Diego, personally, politically, culturally, economically. So, yeah, we'll see. It's May 2nd is the next Board of Supervisor vote that they're going to have on how to move forward, whether they're going to do a special election, whether they're going to do an appointment, or whether they're going to do an interim appointment. And then that person would have to rerun. So that's going to create, it's really going to show the cards of what the party believes is the best approach, because you best believe it coming from Nora as the chair, it's going to be what the Democrat County Party wants to do.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Steve, I want to turn to you. So, in your opinion, we talked earlier, we led with the whole discussion about how this is a blow to the Fletcher political faction legacy. But is it sort of isolated there, or is this, like, what are the ramifications for the regional Democratic Party as a whole? Or is it just sort of the buck stops with Fletcher?
I think it's going to be the buck stops with Fletcher, because nobody wants to be connected with him right now. It's not good. Races can be lost that way, or it could, and races have been lost for less. But it's something as nuclear as this, like you just don't want to be attached to it. So right now, I don't know that guy. You got his endorsement on your website. Like you had to go through the chain of command to get those endorsements. Yeah. But as far as kind of what Zack's talking point on who is the leader or that poster child, right? Gloria is very wounded right now. Todd Gloria, the mayor of San Diego.
I was gonna say
homelessness is killing him. Shady land deals is killing him. That incestuous kind of insider behavior is killing him. Lorenza, again, going back to them, they did a great story a couple months ago showing that his approval ratings in the tank. He may not win a second term, and so when you look at so he's kind of on shaky ground. Nathan's out. Who you got? Toni Atkins? Okay, but she's a state senator. She's running for lieutenant governor. So that's not really the local leader. So, from people I've talked to, Nora's running around saying that she's the most powerful woman in San Diego. So I can see her, kind of maybe taking up that mantle in some regards. But I think it's going to be a dogfight to get to that point, to be, who's going to be
the next Nathan Fletcher.
Yeah, the poster child. Oh, they're not going to say the next Nathan Fletcher.
Well,
you stay away from that.
Not going to call it that.
Right.
But
right.
In effect.
Yes.
And so I can see Nora, maybe Tara, but again, maybe Sean Alejo Rivera, but Alejo Rivera has been carrying a lot of Todd Gloria's water. So especially with Ash Street scandal and some of these real estate deals. So
He's also mentioned in the lawsuit.
that's true. And right, that he may have known that Fletcher was seeing her because they were texting back and forth. So it's unclear of what, he knew and when he knew it. But other than that, like, I don't know who's a really powerful figure in the Democratic Party right now. I haven't really seen that kind of leadership from anyone, whether it's, any of the mayors or representatives at Sandag or just, who are charismatic and garner the media attention that Fletcher did. So we'll see. They're gonna fight it out. So it'll be interesting to see how that all develops too.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. You made a comment about how probably on different websites for some of these candidates, they have Nathan Fletcher's endorsement.
Absolutely.
I was just picturing them furiously editing their websites to scrub those endorsements, furiously editing their Instagrams to get rid of those
I'm
photos.
sure.
But everybody's already screenshotted it. It's the internet, your history. Like that's
Internet's
it.
forever.
Right,
But,
and you can go to the Wayback Machine too, so they can try to scrub it, but it's been archived and cached already, so it's somewhere.
But they're for sure doing their best to distance themselves. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do want to close, but again, thanks so much for both of you coming on. And like, the thing is that, again, I know I sound like a broken record here, but we still don't know for sure how this lawsuit's going to play out. We don't know if it's going to be a settlement, if it goes to trial. If it goes to trial, that'd be interesting because then there'd be discovery and a lot more would come out. But we still don't know for sure how this thing's going to shake out. We don't know if these allegations are true, if they're false. And like, I will put this out there, which is that, Nathan Fletcher, if you're listening, which I doubt, I would love to have you on the podcast, get your firsthand account of what actually happened. And I mean, maybe in the future, we're going to see that this, as we talked about, that this sort of not necessarily blows over for him, but that their faction is able to somewhat recover from this in the long run. I personally don't think so, but it's a possibility. As I've said before, we've seen on the national level of politics, we've seen numerous people recover from these kinds of allegations, of impropriety, and move on to have successful political careers. So we'll see what shakes out with Fletcher. But in any case, thanks Steve for coming on. Thanks Zach. I hope this isn't the last time we have you both on. And Steve, I want to just commend you for the reporting that you've done on this entire topic. And Zach, did you want to promote your own website as well for people who aren't familiar with your content?
Yeah, so if you need a little deep dive on Nathan Fletcher, you can go check out www.fedupwithfletcher.com or check us out on Instagram at fedupwithfletcher or Twitter at fedupwithfletcher. Or you can follow my journey at Zack Gianino on Twitter. I kind of, because I'm in the forefront of a lot of this discussion, a lot of these things are personal to me as well. So I post a lot of what's going on in the county on my personal, but yeah, either way, definitely check us out.
Awesome, appreciate it. Steve, anything you want to promote or?
Just read the Coast News.
Read the Coast News, yeah. Great paper. All right, well, thanks both of you coming on, and let's make it happen again.
Perfect,
yeah,
thank
absolutely.
you.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsors, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Dorado Nutrition at doradonutrition.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.